Hello and welcome back. I'm Sam. I shipped a short the other week regarding Tumblr and WordPress, specifically this article, and it was a bit mixed in terms of sort of likes and dislikes. Like it's a bit of a sort of, I'll be honest, a little bit of just a hot take sort of piece that's under a minute long, but one thing I wanted to expand on sort of in a longer form video was what this would look like from a development and just an infrastructure standpoint. Full context, I work for a major hosting provider, and one of the things that we deal with on day in, day out is sort of scoping the technical aspects of what sites like this would look like. So I'm uniquely positioned in terms of how I would go ahead and position something like this for an end customer, or something like this for a large solution and scoping a server out to handle something like this. I specifically wanted to highlight a comment in terms of the Ars Technica article. So it's around roughly more 500 million blogs, which is a lot. And if you think about how Tumblr works, how the backend works, what it looks like, how an end user interacts with it, as well as from what we're aware of for how the stack is built. So for context, Marco Arment and a partner built Tumblr back in the early aughts and late 2010, early 2010s, and ended up using, from what we're aware of, PHP amongst other things. So it's a basic sort of LEMP stack. And if you have a look at converting over to WordPress, obviously WordPress runs on that same stack. So there's not a lot of software sort of interoperability going on. Like you don't have to worry about changing a .NET framework to PHP and having to do like a massive rewrite. You are just converting a lot of what you can. Yes, there's going to be some pain, but overall, it's not the most complex sort of rebuild out there. Yeah, the scale is a thing, but if you narrow it down to an app and sort of rebuilding an app and repositioning it to use WordPress, there's a lot of interoperability there between the current version of Tumblr and WordPress. But one thing I wanted to highlight that I thought was quite interesting, and speaking to some friends in the industry over the weekend, as well as some thoughts on how this would run, is a multi-site. And I've pulled this image from zen.agency, and they've got an interesting write-up on how multi-sites work. So if you don't know how a multi-site works, I'm going to link this in the description below. But to sort of give you an abridged version, with a multi-site, you have a single install or a single tenant, and then you have all the content and all the data on a single database. All the page and posts are, again, same thing on a single database, but you have a multitude of subsites. Now, this might not be the best idea for Tumblr, but it is an idea on how to do it for Tumblr, especially considering Automatic inherently controls the infrastructure and the stack and how WordPress works under the hood. They could do a specific flavor of WordPress and fork their own version that's like Tumblr Press or something like that, but it would still be working with WordPress at the end of the day. Personally, how I would do this is if you had the back end of Tumblr reskinned and you white label WordPress to look like that back end, so the user's experience is essentially the same. Maybe some new features you could deploy at the same time, just depends, but let's just say, one-to-one at this point in time, and you have multiple blogs for multiple users going all across these sites here from A to B to A to Z. All 500 million of them get shipped, right? And once you've moved essentially everything over and done an infrastructure migration, you would then be able to sort of do a call to arms of all your current users to either purge old data, clean up the databases, clean up any old data structures, content moving. It's essentially just text and images at its core, and moving that into a more modern sort of a standard and a framework on how to handle that with WordPress. This would be my approach personally. I'm not a fan with multi-sites, but if you can throw enough resources at multi-sites, they can get quite good and are very straightforward, especially considering when you look at how a normal multi-site works. When you have a network, you have a theme and some plugins, and they're network activated, and they are the same sort of approach across a fleet of subsites. If you are white labeling WordPress or Tumblr Press or whatever you want to call it in this theoretical example, you would end up taking Tumblr and all the plugins associated to run that end user experience. And every subsite is essentially a user, an individual user as a network admin of their own subsite, but then the overall admins are Automatic, which would be an interesting way to do it. You would need to remap some functionality on how WordPress works, like what would a user's level of sort of authority be over their own blog. Obviously, you can delete at will, so you'd be able to need to give them the end authority to delete a subsite or have a request go to the network and then come back down to authenticate. Yes, I'm a logged in user. I run samsblog.com, whatever you want to do with Tumblr, and then delete it. So there would be some authentication sort of restrictions there that they need to work out. But there is a lot of potential to remap this how we want it here. And if we go back to the original article that I did on the short, it's not going to be easy, and they sort of highlight that here there as well. It is a enormous technical migration, and one thing I don't think they've also called out here too, if they do use a multi-site, this would be one of the largest, if not the largest multi-site in history on the web. So white labeling and kind of forking WordPress to do Tumblr press and run it in this way seems the most sense, rather than fighting with current versions of WordPress and 6.7's releases around the corner with the 2025 theme and a bunch of other sort of controversial changes with Gutenberg and more stuff being launched as the iterations come on. If they forked their own version, you can stay on, let's say 6.6 or whatever version they want to run with .com internally, and then make Tumblr press and do it that way. That's all. I just want to highlight that going off the short. I personally think this is a really cool idea. The short was a bit sort of one side and one noted, say, yeah, this is a really interesting idea. But technically, when you sort of unpack what this looks like, this is an infrastructure challenge that no one really has seen very often in the industry. Stuff like this doesn't come around very often. And personally, I'm keeping my eye to see how this progresses. It will take a while to do this, but what they end up doing with it, I really hope they do a white paper or something related to how they went deploying this end solution. It will be really interesting to see how this ended up. Anyway, I appreciate you all for watching. And if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. Thanks.